Good afternoon to you diplomats in training, organizers of the program, excellencies, colleague speakers. I see Sir, he is here. Good afternoon. And friends. It is an honor to participate with you in today's program on the future we want. In 1962, the publisher for the legendary comic book creator Stan Lee asked Mr. Lee to create a new kind of superhero. Marvel Comics at the time was creating its own kind of summit of the future. Stan Lee had envisioned a teenage hero with the ability to stick on walls and to crawl on them. When he pitched the idea to his publisher, the publisher told Stan Lee, "That is the worst idea I've ever heard. People hate spiders. Teenagers can only be sidekicks. Superheroes don't have personal problems." But Lee had faith in his vision. He put Spider-Man on the cover of the final issue of Amazing Fantasy. When the sales figures came in, his publisher raced into Lee's office, exclaiming, "Stan, remember that character we both loved so much, Spider-Man? Let's do him in a series." It all began with an idea and the courage to see it through. Your commitment, approaching this year's Summit of the Future and beyond it, is to create tangible ambitions that reflect the new world being built on a planet that must last for future generations. You must commit to defeating infrastructures of hate and injustice, and eliminate or neutralize conditions that can lead to the disintegration of the international rules-based order. Adam Lapel of the International Peace Institute pointed out recently that there's a tremendous amount of agreement around the values of international cooperation and the need to reinforce the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. However, sharing values and principles of an international rules-based order is not the same as collective acceptance of how to achieve global stability. For the last half-century, we have been in an ongoing collision between two forces of two great traumas that is splitting global priorities: the evils of man-made conflict and the human rights ambitions against these evils, and the evils of development subjugation and the right to development claimed by the Global South. Divisions are hardening between historical injustice against peoples, wealth and capacity inequalities, and diluted acceptance of institutions that are not appropriately internationally inclusive. Over the decades, multilateralism has had milestones of uncontested visions within states and in the international community that have enhanced the rule of law, international stability, and state development for the futures that peoples wanted. But there are 55 ongoing conflicts in the world. In my own CARICOM region, there is a humanitarian crisis destroying millions of people in Haiti because of internal political instability, and there is a threat to CARICOM as a zone of peace. Reactions to the border dispute between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, in spite of a provisional order ruling by the International Court of Justice in that matter. I also take cognizance of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the conflicts in the African states. These environments and threats of conflict deplete the world of spaces for human beings to flourish. You should remember that power invites you to a platform of responsibility, but it can also be a tool of miscalculation of actions. Ideologies are instruments of infallibility. Dangers to multilateralism, inequality, and lack of trust are not eliminated by postures toward peace. Respect for the United Nations Charter is cultivated by creating equity for others in our ambitions. The Summit of the Future is to address the ambitions of a world that has seen extraordinary changes since the creation of the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and the installment of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. More than 80 countries have gained independence since 1945. By 2030, the global rural population will be reduced to 4 out of 10 people. There's a point that I'd like to refer to regarding how we deal with the disequilibrium in power, who has it and who seeks it. In 1971, when the United States dropped the gold standard, they internally asked a question: what do we do to maintain global supremacy? We've lost our surplus in trade. And a very clever, the equivalent of my central bank governor, said, we don't have to control global trade or lead it. We only have to control the circulation of money from global trade. From 1971 to today, the international community has not found another mechanism that produces stability and predictability in our affairs. The Summit of the Future and your contribution to it has to be that you include making recommendations on how to generate global productivity in ways that elevate the international community out of spheres of influence. This is the danger if we do not find solutions. The international community has the capacity to create solutions at global scale. Your work is to avoid the waste of siloed solutions in matters of international consequence. Let me address the overarching challenge and our ambitions with it. Pope John Paul II in 1993, it's a Sunday New York Times, he asked about the limitations of human capacity and the changes of the times we live in. He asked, can the mind, whose essence is of time, catch love, which is its own eternity? His question was to frame the flow of all existence as the barrier between our foresight of the future and the attainment of the highest quality for human preservation. Here's an example of the limitations we have in that challenge. In 1946, the United Nations created the Commission on the Status of Women. In 1948, a woman led the pioneering of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And it took 74 years for us to create an International Day of Women in Diplomacy. When in 46 and 48, you had these milestones that celebrated and championed enfranchising women in the international community. This is what Pope John Paul II was referring to when he asked about the mind and capturing time. We have another problem. Henry Kissinger has explained the emergence of artificial intelligence on the world in this way. We have found the key to a new aspect of reality which we did not know existed. We cannot contain in one brain or in one machine what AI's potential offers. Every issue now has a global component, but no equal equivalent, incentive, or benefit. I put it to you diplomats in training that the contest to win for you is to produce innovations common to the heritage of mankind. In seeking advancements across the international community, the innovations we need require complementarity. And this is how you are to engage. Engagement in this new reality requires concentrating on 3 skills primarily: the practice of urgency, learning to extrapolate the right elements to create value in your work, and designing outcomes that move effectively from concept to practice. There is a lack of alignment between state capacity, international organization resources, incentivizing the private sector, and the lack of will in the international financial institutions. Your task in creating the future you want is to create institutions and entities that are the other, whatever the value construct is, that will bridge the differences amongst our existing infrastructure and create relevant, effective goods for the global population. Urgency of perspective is the only approach that you can have with time in diplomacy. The urgency is not merely the moment of an intensified incident. What you should take away from this is that an urgent perspective is really an analytical marathon in considering all of the dimensions of benefits and consequences involved in advancing an agenda. Three elements together: urgency, extrapolation of the right components of ingenuity, aiming for outcomes, and tangible outcomes should come together to produce your formulation of the outcomes for the Summit of the Future. I will use the formulation of the Sustainable Development Goals to illustrate what you should seek to achieve at the Summit of the Future. In 2015, the SDGs were successfully negotiated. They are a conceptualization of great value propositions that complement the United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That agenda lacks an effective, practical framework, and it could never succeed in a global environment where the majority of states experience escalating inequality and the absence of resources and technical capacity. The production of vaccines, though, by the private sector during the pandemic gave us an illustration of an alternative framework for achieving the SDGs. The international community should negotiate at the Summit of the Future the creation of 17 milestone innovations or products that would be shared as public goods throughout the international community, one product or innovation for each of the 17 SDGs. This is the challenge that you should take into the Summit of the Future. I will close in the fashion of a discussion between two characters in a science fiction series that I enjoy, Three-Body Problem. The program organizers said to the physicist, "The engineers I have are some of the most accomplished in the world, but they are all fixated on feasibility. Everything is limited, nothing is possible." He said, "Here's my charge to you. Find me a way," in explaining to the young physicist the challenge he wanted to address. He said, "Find me a way, if you can. Dream up a solution, and if you do, I want you to make your proposal. And this is where you enter the Summit of the Future." I commend you to do this, and I thank you for your attention.